Hi, I'm Paul and thanks for watching another of my videos. This is another PowerApps themed video, and what I'm going to have a little chat about today is reusing code and trying to be more efficient with our code. Efficient in the way that we write the code, not necessarily more efficient for the application, but to try and write a little bit less code, try and make our code a little bit more understandable. So what led up to me having a look into this? Well, I was working on this application which I'm showing on the screen at the moment. I don't want to go too in depth about what this application is and does, but in very short, we've got a list of menu items, we've got a list of stock items, and the idea is that you can build up recipes or a bill of materials to say, okay, this menu item makes use of these stock items. So that's the purpose of it. And I was experimenting with different sort of user interface approaches. So for this one, I've made it a single screen application. But there are a lot of elements that appear and disappear based on the route that we're taking through our data. So let's just sort of give you a quick example of that, just 30 seconds. So the idea here is that I could select the stock item ground beef, and then the system will go off and it will go and say, okay, the stock item ground beef, the unit of measure is grams, the reorder level is 1,500, and then here are the menu items which make use of ground beef, and this is how much of the ground beef they use. And then we could click on the add button here. So I want to add another item into this list. So we're adding an item into this list. This is going grayed out. This one is still live and it's telling us, look, you can just select a menu item on the right. So I think we've got another kind of burger on the menu. Let's just give that a quick check. Come on, PowerApps, don't go super slow on me when I'm in the middle of a demo, please. Okay, well, while that's going off and finding the burger, I think I can still enter the quantity and say, okay, this particular type of burger is going to use 150 grams, and there it is, the Sublime Super Burger. So we've clicked on Sublime Super Burger, we filled that in, we click on the tick, and then PowerApps will add that into our list here. So there now is our Sublime Super Burger at the bottom. So that was choosing a stock item and then having a look at what menu items it's used in. You can also go the other way, so you can choose a menu item, okay, and then it will say, okay, these are the stock items that menu item consumes. So there we are, going a little bit slowly today, unfortunately, but you get the idea. So what the app does isn't so important as the fact that the user interface is turning on and off lots of different controls. So this form is the form for menu items, and that is actually a different control. It just happens to be in exactly the same place, but it's a different control to this one for modifying the stock details. So I've got different controls which are becoming visible and invisible depending on what we're clicking on, what route we're taking through our data in the system. And likewise, if I come back and edit this Sublime Super Burger, I'm going into the same form here at the bottom, but I've hidden the part of the form where I select what the menu item is. Okay, because I'm just editing what the quantity is. So there's a lot of hiding of controls and showing of controls going on, and that got really quite tedious when there are lots of places where you're clicking and you're having to hide a bunch of controls and show a bunch of different controls. So I started trying to think about, well, how can we get a little bit more efficient with this? So I'm going to come out of this application and I'm going to come into a completely fresh application here. So we're not cluttered with all the other stuff that's going on with that application. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put 6 controls. I'll put 6 labels on the screen, and I want to be able to make visible and invisible different combinations of those labels, and we'll see how we can do that in some more efficient and easier to track fashions, and we'll look at the concept of some code reuse as well, although, spoiler, there are issues with that which I'm going to demonstrate. So that's enough introductory waffle. So in we go. Let's put in a few labels. So here's my label. I'm going to name it, and we'll just call it LBL test. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a bunch of copies of this. Copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, and one. Yeah, that's it, 6. So we've got 6 of those. I'm going to get rid of the first one now because I want my naming all to be consistent. So to try and give myself a kind of a array of controls which are named consistently, I just created one with no number and then copied and pasted it a bunch of times, and now I've got ones with numbers on them. So I'll get rid of that one, and then we're just going to rearrange these a little bit. There's label 1, there's label 2. So I'll do label 1, 2 and 3 in a one column, and I'll do label 4, 5 and 6 right next to that in another column. So there we are. So now I'm going to want some buttons which turn things on and off. So let's add 2 buttons to begin with. So I'm going to have my first button here. This is going to be my button for show all, and I'll have another button for, you guessed it, we're going to have hide all. So we'll start simple and then we'll start doing combinations. Okay, and let's just name these buttons as well. So btn hide all and btn show all. Because I'm only having one screen in this demo, I'm just going to name these like you can see them on here. Normally what I do, if you've got an application with several screens, because the name of every control has to be unique within PowerApps, because any control can reference any other, what I usually do with my naming convention is I give the screen a name, and then at the end of my control name I have underscore and then the name of the screen that it comes from, and I just find that helps me keep track of things a little bit easier when I've got multiple screens in a system. Okay, so we've got our show all and our hide all. Did I lose the word all off here? Yeah. Okay, now if you're relatively new to PowerApps, this may give you a second to think about. How do we get a button to turn the visibility of a label on and off? Because of course PowerApps is a declarative language rather than an imperative language. So in imperative language you give commands. So you would tend to say, okay, LBL test1 dot visible for the visible property equals true or equals false. So you would set that in a line of code. Now we can't do that directly here because it's all sort of tips on its heads with PowerApps, and instead what we do is we go into the visible property of the control itself. Come on. And we can set that to true or we can set it to false. So I can't say from this button directly, I can't say, right, set LBL test1 dot visible equals true. But what I can do is I can say, look, I'm going to set this to be the value of a variable, and one of the few sort of commands we can issue is we can set the value of a variable. So I can't directly set this visible property, but I can base this visible property on a variable, and then I can set the value of the variable. So seems a little bit convoluted, but there is a sort of logic behind it which tends to make your applications a little bit easier to maintain once the things are written. So I'm going to base this on a variable, So I'm going to call this var viz, call it T1 for test 1. Var viz T1. So that's my variable. So right now I'm getting a little warning sign telling me I don't know what this is. You haven't specified what var viz T1 should be. There's nothing which is actually specifying that that is a variable and setting the value for it. But as soon as I put something under my button to do that, then that little warning triangle will disappear. So let me just copy that, make sure no typos. So in the on select of this button, I'm going to issue my set command, and with my set command I can specify the name of a variable, and I can specify a value for it. So in this case I'm going to say we'll set that value to true. And we can see that the little warning triangle has disappeared now, because now PowerApps does know that var viz T1 is a variable and something else in my application is going to set it to something. The text hasn't reappeared though, because I haven't pushed this button yet, so I haven't set the value of var viz 1 to true, but let's do that now. So I'm going to click this button, and there we are. So the button has now appeared. And similarly, what we could do here is we could say, okay, when we want to hide it, I'm going to set this to false. So now we've got the facility to show and hide. We've only hooked up the first button. We'll hook up the other buttons in a second. But we've got the facility to show and hide these labels. Okay, so let's get this working on all of them. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to copy this. So I'm going to try and cut down on the amount of copying and pasting and typing that I've got to do. So a little trick here is I can actually multi-select controls. I can go to their relevant property, which would be on select, and I can paste in something for all of them there. Now they're all set to var viz T1 at the moment, which we don't want, because we want to be able to turn these labels on and off independently. So in addition to these buttons which show everything and hide everything, what we'll do, let's just pop some icons on now so you can see, is we will, for the purposes of this demonstration, also have a little button beside it, and when I click on this button I want only this label to be visible, and we'll have another button, and when we click on that one we want only the next label to be visible, this one, and so on. So I'll pop the other ones on there in a moment. Okay, so each of these shouldn't be based on var viz T1. This is label test 2, so I'm going to make this var viz T2, and var viz T3, and var viz T4. And you'll see as I'm doing it, I'm getting the little yellow triangles, but you know why that is now. It's because I haven't yet anywhere else in my PowerApp put in a command which sets any kind of a value, so kind of sets it up as a variable. So let's put that in now. So in PowerApps we can actually issue multiple statements under our onSelect. So I'm going to be putting in 6 statements, and these are going to be setting my variables. In this case I'm setting them all to true. Lovely. When you're doing this, remember to take out the last semicolon, because PowerApps doesn't like a trailing semicolon there. It will give you a warning on that. So the show all sets the variables to true, and the hide all, you guessed it, is going to set all of those variables to false. So let's do a bit of copy and pasting there. Fantastic. So now I hit the show all button, everything is showing. I hit the hide button, and not everything is showing. What have I done there? Alright, I've been a little bit ham-fisted here. What I've done is I've set the varvis2 to the onSelect property, not to the visible property. So I'm sure you all spotted that and you were all shouting at your screens, "Hey Paul, you idiot, you've done it wrong again." So let's clear out what was in the onSelect. Let's go back into the visible. So var vis, this one happens to be T2. There we go, and then we'll go through, and we're on the correct property now. So always have a good look at what property you're typing into. Varvis T4, Varvis T5, Varvis T6. Okay, let's try that again. Hide all, they all hide. Show all, they all appear. So, lovely. Okay, so we've perhaps covered a little bit of new ground there. Hopefully there's a few things, perhaps if you weren't aware of them before, they give you some ideas for places where you can use them. So we've got multiple lines in there, and we've got the idea of setting the properties for things through a variable rather than sort of directly within the formula of the item itself. Okay, so let's carry on a little bit then. And what I want now is I want this tick to make only this label visible. So that should be fairly straightforward. What we can do, oops, if I expand this out again, is we could copy this little block of code. I can attach it to the onSelect of this icon, and I can say, look, only the first control should be visible. So I'm going to do some copying and pasting there. So there we are. So now only the first control is visible when I click on this button. And then if I wanted to have that apply to the next button as well, what I've got to do, of course, is I've got to copy all of this code, and I've got to pop it here, and I've got to paste it all again, and then I've got to say, actually no, the first one in this case is false, the next one should be true, and now I should have the ability to just individually turn these ones on and off. So if I were to go on and add that to all of these controls, I've got 36 lines of code to deal with, and then every time I add a new control, I'm going to have to go back in to all 6 of the existing controls and then add a new line in there as well. And that's all, in my view, a little bit tedious. So this is where I was trying to sort of simplify things a little bit. So something that we can do, let's have a little look at this. So if I were writing this in a traditional, imperative language, I would probably set up a couple of routines. And one routine would be, look, hide everything. And then on my button, I can just say, first of all, call the routine hide everything, and then just make this one label visible. Now we can attempt something similar in PowerApps, because what we can do is we can fire another button from the onSelect of another icon or button control. So let's do that. What we can do is we can just say select, and I'll make it do the hide all. Oops. So when I click on this, just select the hide all button. So now, boom, it's reusing the code. Isn't that fantastic? So under this hide all, I've got these 6 lines of code, and if I need to hide everything from somewhere else in my application, from another button, I can just say, okay, when I click here, then click this button for me, which is great. Okay, and there are a whole load of really good uses for that. So there might be a whole lot of different things that you want to have trigger refreshing, the data in your system. So it might not just be the one refresh button. You might want to say, well, okay, depending on how I've done it, if I've added a new record, then fire all that refresh code again, so I'm sure that that record is displaying. Or if I've deleted a record, fire it again. If I've modified the record, fire it again. Okay, so there are some good uses for this, but let's carry on with the example we were looking at here, which is to say, right, I'm going to make my life easier by saying when I click on this button, I only want one label visible, so I'm going to hide all of the labels and then just make one visible. So now I've got 2 lines of code here under this button rather than the 6 that I had previously. So I've got the 6 labels, I would have 6 buttons, 6 lines of code underneath, 36 lines of code to maintain. Change it to this way and it's 2 lines of code per button, 6 buttons, 12 lines of code to maintain. And if I add new controls, then things get easier still. Anyway, that was the goal. Let's see what actually happens then. So I've said select button, hide all, and then set my variable here for my first label to make its visible property true. So that's all great. I'm going to hit my show all button, just so we're starting with everything showing. Now I'm going to click my icon here. Dear. Nothing at all is showing. So my command was to say select this button, the hide all, and now set the visible, set the variable that the visible property of the control is based on to true, but it hasn't worked. So why hasn't it worked? Because the lines of code, when you have multiple lines of code in PowerApps, those lines of code don't necessarily fire in the order that you've written them. So what's actually happened here, sort of a bit counterintuitively, is PowerApps has decided to run this command first to set this label's, or the variable behind this label's visibility property to true, and then it's just gone and hit this hide all button for us and run all that code that just sets it all back to false again. So we have a brief moment where it's true and then it all goes back to false. So that's really a little bit of a pain. So if the order of the instructions is important to you, you don't want to be doing this selecting another button business. If the order really doesn't matter, then it's fine, and in a lot of cases the order is not really going to matter, but where the order does matter, then this isn't a good solution, or not a solution at all to use. So that's a little bit on code reuse. We can do the select, and that's the pitfall. You can't guarantee the order. In fact, it seems from my experimentation that all of these selects happen last. So if you're calling another piece of code which is behind another button, that's going to happen last. And if you're calling out to multiple buttons with code behind them, you've got no idea which one is going to happen in what order. So having said that, I still wanted to find a solution to this problem I had, where I've got so many lines of code behind each thing, and where if I add one new item, I've got a whole load of recoding to do in my application. So let's have a little look at a solution for this very specific example where I want these labels to be turned on and turned off individually by only clicking one button and not two. You know, if we say hide all and then click, then you know, that wouldn't be a problem if we didn't mind doing 2 clicks. But I do mind doing 2 clicks, so I want all this on a single click. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a matrix which is going to determine when these different things are visible and not visible. I'm going to store that within my PowerApp, and then I'm going to reference that. I'm going to have a look in that matrix for each of these controls to turn their visible or set their variable for their visible property on or off. So let's have a little look at how we can do that. So I'm going to put this on a button at the moment so that we can all see what's happening, and this button is going to be for making our collection. So we've seen variables already. Collections are very much like variables, but they're two-dimensional. They're a table. They've got rows and they've got columns that you can reference. And we can put things in a collection a number of ways, and one way to do that is just to issue a collect command. So with the collect command, we've got to give our collection a name. I'm going to call my one colviz setting, so we're going to have a whole load of settings stored. And then we've got to use our curly braces, and we're going to put in the heading name, the name of the column, and then for this row, what value are we going to set it to? So let me make this show all, and then a comma, and then I can do another one, and I can say, okay, the value that I want for test viz1, so is it going to be visible or not? In this case, we're in the show all set, so that's going to be true. PowerApps prefers lowercase. So now let's just use a little bit of copying and pasting. So the second one should also be visible, the third one should be visible, and the fourth one should be visible, and the fifth one should be visible, and the sixth one should be visible as well. Got to remember to put in my close curly brace and my close bracket, and then I think that command is all good. I'm just going to fix this typo here. Okay, and in a second I'm going to click on this collection button. We've got the ability to view what's in our collections, so although I haven't run that command yet to put something in this collection, because I've got an instruction which sets up and names the columns, the collection is still visible to me here. So as soon as I've got something, even if I haven't run it yet, as soon as I've got a collect command, then it's going to show up in that collections list. And now I'm going to click on the collect button, go to my collections. I think I double clicked it there, unfortunately. But now I've got information in there. So that's good. So for my show all, I know that all of my labels, I want to make sure they're visible. Now I've accidentally hit the button twice, accidentally on purpose, so I can show you something, which is that when you use the collection command, you're adding something onto let's think of them as tables, you're adding something onto that table. So it doesn't get rid of what was there previously. But what we can do is we can just say clear goal viz setting. There we are. And now when we click on this button, it's going to clear out anything that's there already and then add whatever comes next. So hit that again, and we should now find that our collection has only got the one line in it. Now we're building up a matrix, and that matrix, we're also going to want to have one in here which is a set name of hide all, which sets all these to visible, and then a set name of perhaps test1 visible, whatever terminology you want to use, but that's going to make just this first one visible and all of the others not visible. So I can do this by putting in additional lines of code. So I can do that. I'm going to show two ways of doing this because I find this a little bit tedious this way. So we can say false, and we can put in our falses in here, And so now if we were to hit this collection button and have a look at the collections, we've got, oopsie, one of them should be called hide all. There we are. Collections. Show all and hide all. So show all set everything to true, hide all set everything to false. Okay. Now there's a fair bit of copying and pasting and stuff and messing around in the formula bar here for doing that. So another little way that you can do this, see this is one that I've set up previously. I've actually set up a little matrix here of the set name and the settings for each of the labels. Is it meant to be visible or not? And then here's my show all and my hide all and my one for the individual items. And then what I've done in Excel is having manually created one line and made sure that it works, I've just created a little formula that then pulls in these values for me. So, you know, much of a muchness. Once you've got this set up, you can save it, and then if you need to modify things, it's a little bit more visual what you're doing. And if you want to add extra rows, it's very quick to do that. So I'll show that in a moment. But right now, what we'll do is we'll pick these up, and we will replace our existing settings with those. And when I copy and paste, I get a little triangle warning. That's because I've got more of these semicolons than I need. So remember to get rid of trailing semicolons. And PowerApps likes these trues and falses to be lowercase, whereas Excel has put them in uppercase. But once you click away from that button and then click back onto it again, PowerApps resolves it and it changes all those trues and falses to lowercase. So now if I hit my button, I've got my complete collections matrix. The preview view only ever shows you 5 of the items in your collection, but we can see that that is filled in. If you want a quick way, as an aside, of seeing all the things in your collection, then what you can do is you can insert a data table somewhere in your app and then set its data source property to be the collection, and then you can just go through and you can tick and say, look, show me all of these various columns. Okay, I've clicked a little bit too quick for it there because I don't want to waste your time, but you get the idea there. So if the list doesn't fit inside, then you should be able to get it to give you scroll bars. Maybe that only works when it's in the running mode, but that's just a way where you can see what's in a collection if you really need to see what's beyond the first 5 items, which is all it ever gives you. Okay, so I've got my collection set up now. So now what I need to do is I need to have something which has a look in that collection and then sets my varviz t1, varviz t2, varviz t3 properties appropriately, variables appropriately. So let's stick an extra button on here just for a moment. I'll clear this button out the way, so we only needed to use this button to get our matrix into the application. So on the button that I've got here now, I'm going to set all these variables in one go by going and having a look at what's in the collection. So here we are. Let's just remember this is called varviz t1. So when I do my select here, I'm going to set my varviz t1 variable. So remember we do that with set and then a comma and what you want to set it to. I'm always doing this. I just can't get out of the habit from previous years of programming. But remember, this is the way that we've got to do it. And now I want to go and grab a value out of my collection. And in my collection, if you remember, I've got these various names. And that's going to let me scan down and say, oh, okay, for this particular setup name, this is what the values of the variable should be. But what I haven't done yet is actually change this so that I've got a set name variable. So let's just do that real quick. So under my show all, I'm going to get rid of these lines of code here, and I'm just going to say set, so another variable, set var set name, and I'm going to make this show all. And this is going to need to match what's in my collection. So what's in my collection matches what I'm showing you in Excel. It's just quicker for me to alt-tab between these things at the moment. So I'm making sure that these names match. So set var name equal to show all. Lovely, got that. So now in here I can say, right, go and get me the value for this label, or where the set name matches whatever has been put in the set name variable. So a lot of variables going on here, a lot of lookups and things, but let's persevere just a little bit longer. We've got this far. So I want to pull out the first value that I find in my col viz setting collection, where the set name equals my var set name, and that should all be okay. Right, 1 second while I double check my syntax on this one. Sorry, yeah, of course what I've done there is I've forgotten to put in my filter command. So I'm going to filter my collection where the set name matches whatever set name has been set by hitting my buttons, and so I'm going to filter that, and what I want to do is get back the name of the column. So that was test phys1 dot test. I just called it test, did I? Okay. So test1. So that's the name of the column in my collection. There we go, and that I think should be that. Okay, so I think that's all good at the moment. We'll see when we put it in for these other ones as well. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to say, right, my variable vizt2 is going to be from my test2 column, and 3. In fact, let's just put these all in, and then we'll quickly do the numbers at the end. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go. Yay, they all showed up. So when I press this button is checking to see what what set name I have chosen. I've chosen the set name by clicking my show all button in this case, and then it's going to go and pull out from our matrix, remember our matrix here, what things should be visible and what things should be hidden. Yeah. So let's try it with our hide all button now. So actually let's do two things first. Let's name this button, which I'm going to call BTN apply set name, and I'm going to say, right, once I have set my variable to show all, now I'm going to select BTN apply set name. So this is setting up the variable to show all, and then this is running the code which is under this button, so that this variable is replaced with set all, is show all in all of these in this case, so that my variables are pulled out of that collection table. So yeah, so let's carry on with the hide all now. Get rid of all of those bits of code, and we'll replace this with hide all. Boom, they've gone. Boom, they're showing. And now on this one here, I can just do the same sort of thing again. I can say, right, I want to use my set name, and that was called testviz1, testviz1. So now when I click this button, only this label is visible, and now I've got far fewer lines of code. Okay, it took us a while to get there, I will accept that, but now we've kind of encapsulated logic behind these buttons, in this case this button here, which, you know, I could then hide, doesn't have to be visible. And now it's dead quick and easy to stick these other buttons in place, and I can just say, right, make that testviz3, and I'll copy that whole batch, move it over to this side, or yeah, let's put them here to the left of them. And so this one is going to be for testviz4, and this one is going to be for testviz5, and this one is going to be for testviz6, and we'll give them a quick try. Boom. Okay, so now we're managing to turn things on, turn things off. So each time we're hitting these buttons, we're setting our visibility mode, and our visibility mode is stored in our collection, and our collection says for this visibility mode which labels are switched on and which labels are switched off. Okay, so it did take a little while to get there, but if you've got a lot of controls that you're turning on and off, I think it's worth considering this, or you've got some other situation where there's a lot of things that you've got to flip between modes, it may still be worth considering this, because although this has been quite complicated to set up and has involved a few steps, if we want to change things later on, it's fairly easy to do it. So let me show you something here. I'm going to go back to the little thing I set up in Excel, and I'm going to say, right, what I want is to have a setting which makes everything in column 1 visible, and a setting which makes everything in column 2 visible. So the things that were in column 1 were test 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to set these to true. and in the other one it's the other column that's visible, and we'll just pop our falses in here, and then I'm going to drag this down, and I can copy paste this code into my Power App. So remember, that sits on our collection button. So if you're doing this for real, you would put this code probably on the application open or the screen visible or something, so you're just creating this collection as you need it. Of course, I've left the semicolon on the end again there. So now I've got two other modes that I can use. So I can quickly grab one of my existing labels. I'll put it over the top of column 1, and I'll say that the set name for this is col1. So now I've got a button which should allow me to see what's in col1. Let me just try and double check what's going on there for a moment. Okay, just wasn't being patient enough. I didn't hit the button enough times. So there we are. So now I've got something that will show me everything in column 1. And what I could do as well very easily, obviously, is now have a button which deals with col2. So there we go. Oh, would be better if that button were over there a little bit more. So we can now flick between these, and obviously you can do them for any combination, you know, every row, every alternate row, whatever it may be. And also, if we're going to add additional elements in here, well, that's fairly easy to do as well. So let's do that very quickly. Let's give ourselves 2 more labels. So these have come out as LBL test 7 and LBL test 8, so that's great. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tweak this a tiny bit. So I've now got my columns 7 and 8. Let's highlight these across. We don't actually use these names here. But we can now say, okay, look, this is fairly easy to set up. These are all going to be falses. These are all going to be falses. Let's, just to keep things consistent, I'll drag that down. So essentially what we can say here is that for these 2 new ones, this is probably the easiest way, set everything to false. Apart from when it's test fit 7, then I want this one true, and this one true, and then the show all obviously is all going to be trues, and the hide all is all going to be falses, and our numbering sequence is a little bit out now, but 7 I think is in column 1, and the other one is part of column 2. So I've just completed my matrix there, so we can see what's going on. In fact, one moment. Okay, so to make things a little bit easier to see for a designer, I've just put a little bit of conditional formatting on here so we can see what things are turned on and what things are turned off under each of these set names. And of course we're just going to have to edit this ever so slightly to take into account that we've now got a test 7 and a test 8 as well. So let me just do a quick bit of editing in there. So that's going to be test 7, this is going to be test 8, this is going to be GH7, this is going to be I7, lovely. So now I'm going to drag that down and I'm going to replace my collection code like so. Click away from it and click back on it again to make sure that those trues and falses have become lowercase, and remember to get rid of the final semicolon. I've got test 6, test 7, but that's easy enough to fix. One should say test 8. So there we are, just took a moment for it to resolve and those little yellow warning lines to disappear. So now we should okay, I didn't actually do anything there, it just seemed to take a second to get itself up to date, or maybe I was clicking on the wrong button. This has been going on a little while now. What other things do we need to do? Let's just double check a couple of settings that we've put in for these. So these new ones, because I copied and pasted them, and these should be test T7 and variable T8. And in our button which goes and pulls the value out of our table, we've just got to say that we also want to get pull out the variables for 7 and 8. These are the columns that we're getting them out of here, and these are the variables we're assigning them to here. And so we've done that, and now hopefully, there we are, hide all, show only the ones in this column. Oh, I've got something a little bit wonky there, show the ones in this column. Fantastic. Show all, let me just see if I can figure out why this one is not quite right. Varvis T8, Varvis T7. I've probably got it wrong in my thing here. So when we're doing col2, 8 should be visible. When we're doing col1, the other one should be visible. So col2, test viz 8 should be visible. Okay, again you probably spotted it when I was quickly doing my editing. That's not meant to be 7, that's meant to be 8 in there. We've got to assign the, or get the value out of the correct column there. So now we're sorted. So here we go. Now we've got our column showing properly. We can turn things on and off individually. We can show them all. We can hide them all. And the other thing I guess that we could do, so let's make this the last thing, is we could add a drop down on here. Okay, sorry about that. That instance of PowerApps is hung, but here is one that I prepared earlier. And what I was going to do was just demonstrate that we can easily hook this up to a drop-down control as well. So that's very easy to do. So let me redo that and show you how that works. So I'm just going to insert controls, a drop-down control, and I'm going to set it to the name of my collection. Okay, and it automatically picks up the first column as being the one that it's going to show you. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the onChange property of the drop down, so that as I select things in the drop down, it's going to change the properties for which are visible and which are not visible on here. So I've jumped into an earlier copy where I was experimenting with things, so I might have called things something slightly differently. So let's just copy paste. So here we are. I'm going to come into here. I'm going to go on the onChange event because we want this to fire when we've selected something in the drop down, not just when we've clicked on the drop down. And the setting that we want to use is whatever has been selected in the drop down, so we can just say drop down 3 dot selected dot set name. There we go. So now on here I've got somewhere show all, I've got hide all, I've got make column 1 visible, I've got make column 2 visible, and so on. So there are a few concepts there. There is a bit to try and get your head around, and there's a bit of prep work for using it in one of these, but once you've got it set up, because you're sort of partly you're reusing code and partly you're using a settings table, if you like, to pull values out of. But it means then that when you're adding buttons or you're adding a drop-down control or something like that, it's relatively straightforward to hook these things up with just a couple of lines of code, as we've done there, rather than having, you know, perhaps dozens of lines of code, because you've got a lot of properties that you need to set. And as we've seen, you can't rely on doing things like just saying, oh, I'll take a shortcut, hide everything, and then just turn on the ones that I want to see, because when we do that, we can't guarantee the order that the commands are being executed in, and it seems to be that it's the selects that happen last anyway. Okay, I hope that wasn't too bitty for you. As I say, few concepts for you to get your head around. Maybe you find it useful, hopefully you do, but drop something into the comments and let me know if you want me to expand upon any of the things that I've covered here today. Then do let me know. Let me know other things that perhaps you would like me to cover. That's always good for me. Perhaps it's an area I haven't looked at yet, and it'd be good for me to try and get my head around that as well. So thank you for your time, and happy power apping.